Stand at the edge of the world where ice meets sky, where silence has a weight you can feel pressing against your chest. Antarctica. A continent larger than Europe, holding within its frozen grip 9/10 of all the ice on Earth. For centuries we've been told this is simply a wasteland, a blank page at the bottom of our maps. But what if that story is incomplete? Beneath miles of ice lie landscapes untouched for millions of years, ancient forests preserved in stone, lakes sealed away from sunlight, teeming with life that evolved in total darkness. And perhaps, if the whispers are to be believed, something more. Ruins that predate recorded history. Technologies we cannot explain. Secrets that powerful nations have agreed to keep buried. Tonight I invite you to journey with me into the heart of this frozen enigma. We'll explore the evidence that challenges everything we think we know about human history. From maps that shouldn't exist to mountains that look too perfect to be natural. From massive military operations shrouded in mystery to treaties that locked away an entire continent. Each thread we follow leads deeper into a question that refuses to be silenced. What is Antarctica really hiding? I'm your guide through this mystery, and as you settle in for the night, let the story unfold like layers of ice, each one revealing something unexpected beneath. Our story begins not in Antarctica, but in a palace in Istanbul in the year 1929. Scholars examining old documents discovered something extraordinary. A map drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis. The chart showed coastlines of South America with remarkable accuracy for its time, but it was the southern portion that caught everyone's attention. There, sketched in faded ink, was a landmass where Antarctica lies. Not the ice-covered continent discovered in 1820, but something else entirely. The coastline matched what modern seismic surveys would later reveal: Antarctica's true shores, hidden beneath ice over a mile thick. How could a 16th century mapmaker know what lay beneath ice that had covered the continent for millions of years? Piri Reis himself provided a clue. In notes on the map he explained that he had compiled it from more than 20 older charts, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. He was copying from sources that no longer exist, fragments preserved through centuries, perhaps from the Great Library of Alexandria before its destruction. In the 1960s, a scholar named Charles Hapgood examined the map closely. His conclusion was startling. The source material must have come from a civilization capable of advanced seafaring and map-making, one that existed when Antarctica was free of ice. Even Albert Einstein, in a letter about Hapgood's work, acknowledged the maps raise profound questions. Other ancient charts echo this mystery. The Orontius Phineus map from 1531 shows a southern continent with rivers and mountain ranges. The Mercator maps from the 1560s display similar features. Each seems to draw from that same lost well of knowledge. If these maps truly depict an ice-free Antarctica, we face an uncomfortable possibility. Someone charted this continent when it was habitable, tens of thousands of years before recorded history begins. The ice preserved the land, the maps preserved the memory. But who were the cartographers? As we ponder this question, our attention shifts from ancient parchment to the frozen landscape itself, where satellite imagery has revealed something equally perplexing. Imagine flying over the Ellsworth Mountains in West Antarctica. Below you stretches an endless white expanse, jagged peaks piercing through the ice like the bones of a buried giant. And then you see it, a mountain unlike the others. 4 triangular faces converge to a sharp summit. The symmetry is unmistakable. From above, it looks exactly like a pyramid. This formation, standing nearly 5,000 feet tall, was identified through satellite imagery in 2016. Geologists call it a nunatak, a peak that rises above the ice sheet. They explain its shape as the result of freeze-thaw cycles and erosion over millions of years, similar to how the Matterhorn in Switzerland was carved into its distinctive form. But here's what gives skeptics pause. Most nunataks are irregular, fractured by time and weather. This peak has 4 near-perfect triangular faces, aligned with striking precision. Its geometry feels deliberate, almost architectural. Pyramids appear across the ancient world. Egypt, Mexico, China, Bosnia. Cultures separated by oceans and millennia all built the same form. Wide bases, sloping sides, summits pointing to the heavens. Some argue it's simply the most stable structure for large monuments. Others suggest it reflects shared knowledge, perhaps inherited from a single-source civilization whose reach extended farther than we imagine. Could Antarctica's pyramid be part of that same story? Satellite surveys have revealed additional anomalies in the region, faint outlines of other symmetrical shapes partially buried, grid-like patterns that suggest organisation rather than chaos. The images are inconclusive, obscured by snow and the limitations of remote sensing. But they're enough to spark speculation about what might lie beneath. If this pyramid is artificial, it would mean Antarctica supported a civilization advanced enough to quarry stone and build monuments. But when? Geological evidence tells us the continent enjoyed temperate conditions until roughly 12 million years ago. Human history as we understand it is far younger. This is where the mystery deepens into territory that challenges conventional timelines. Either our understanding of human origins is incomplete, or something else once walked this land. The pyramid stands as a silent question mark, too symmetrical to ignore, too remote to easily investigate. And it's not the only mystery that emerged from the frozen south in the rare mid-20th century. Just over 70 years ago, a massive military operation descended on Antarctica with a scale and urgency that demanded explanation. The year was 1946. World War II had ended barely a year before. Cities across Europe and Asia were still rebuilding. Resources were scarce. And yet, the United States government organised the largest Antarctic expedition in history. Operation High Jump involved over 4,000 men, 13 ships including aircraft carriers and destroyers, and dozens of aircraft. Led by Admiral Richard Byrd, the legendary polar explorer, the mission's official purpose was straightforward: map uncharted territory, test equipment in extreme cold, and train personnel for potential Arctic warfare. But the scale seemed disproportionate for a scientific survey. Why send such a massive force to a continent with no people, no strategic value in conventional terms? And why launch it so soon after a devastating global war? The fleet split into 3 groups, sweeping across the continent to photograph and document more than 1.5 million square miles. They established bases, conducted flights deep into the interior, and gathered data at an unprecedented pace. Then, abruptly, the mission ended. Scheduled to last 6 to 8 months, Operation High Jump was terminated after barely 2. Official reports cited harsh weather and logistical challenges. Several aircraft were lost, including one that crashed with fatal casualties. But the sudden withdrawal raised questions that have never been fully answered. Admiral Byrd himself added to the mystery. In an interview given in Chile after the expedition, he spoke in unusual terms. He warned that the United States must prepare for the possibility of attacks from hostile aircraft, capable of travelling from pole to pole at remarkable speeds. His language felt more ominous than a routine scientific mission would warrant. Decades later, a document surfaced purporting to be Byrd's secret diary. In it, he described an extraordinary experience during a reconnaissance flight over the Antarctic interior. According to the account, his instruments failed, his aircraft was seized by an invisible force, and he was guided to a hidden valley of warmth and greenery where ice should have been. There, the diary claims, he encountered tall beings with luminous eyes who welcomed him to a subterranean realm. They spoke of ancient wisdom and warned humanity about the destructive path of nuclear weapons. Before sending him back, they entrusted him with a message of peace. Most historians dismiss the diary as fiction, created to feed the growing fascination with UFOs in the post-war years. Byrd never spoke publicly of such an encounter, and no official records corroborate the story. Yet it persists, perhaps because Antarctica itself feels like a place where the impossible might be true. What makes Operation High Jump compelling isn't just the diary, but the context. Just months after the mission ended, the modern UFO phenomenon began with Kenneth Arnold's famous sighting of 9 flying objects over Washington state. By summer of 1947, Roswell entered the cultural imagination. Some theorists connect these events to what Byrd's fleet might have encountered: advanced technology, whether from surviving Nazi experiments or something more exotic. Others point to the geopolitical landscape. If remnants of the Third Reich had established a presence in Antarctica, investigating it would have been a priority. The mystery of Operation High Jump reminds us that in a place as vast and inaccessible as Antarctica, official explanations can leave enormous gaps. and into those gaps, speculation flows like water into ice. While the surface of Antarctica appears lifeless, beneath the ice lies a hidden world. More than 400 subglacial lakes exist under the ice sheet, some larger than cities, connected by rivers that flow in perpetual darkness. Lake Vostok is the most famous. Sealed beneath nearly 2.5 miles of ice, it stretches 155 miles long and 30 miles wide. The water has been isolated from the atmosphere for at least 15 million years. When Russian scientists finally drilled into it in 2012, they found traces of microbial DNA, evidence that life endures even here. Lake Mercer, accessed in 2018, revealed thriving bacterial communities. Lake Whillans contain thousands of microbial species. In 2020, researchers identified Lake Enigma, where radar suggested complex structures within the water, microbial mats forming shapes that almost resembled architecture. These discoveries transform our understanding of life's limits. If microbes can survive in complete darkness, extreme cold and crushing pressure, then life could exist in equally hostile environments elsewhere. Beneath the ice of Jupiter's moon Europa, or in the subsurface oceans of Saturn's Enceladus. But the lakes hold another kind of mystery. Radar scans have occasionally detected anomalies that resist easy explanation. Electromagnetic pulses near Lake Vostok in 2021. Cavities beneath the ice in Princess Elizabeth Land that some estimated at 2/3 the size of Manhattan. Officially, these are attributed to natural geology, meltwater dynamics, or instrumentation error. Yet in a continent where vast landscapes remain unmapped, where access is tightly controlled and exploration limited, even scientific anomalies take on a mythic quality. Could these sealed chambers contain more than microbes, ancient ecosystems from when Antarctica was green, or, as some whisper, something deliberately hidden? One lake in particular captures the imagination with more than mystery. It bleeds. In the McMurdo Dry Valleys, one of Earth's most alien landscapes, a crimson stream flows from the Taylor Glacier. Blood Falls, as it's called, stains the pristine white ice with vivid red, as if the continent itself were wounded. When explorers first encountered it in 1911, they had no explanation. The colour was so striking, so unnatural, that it felt like an omen. Science eventually provided an answer. Beneath the glacier lies a pocket of brine, sealed off for over 5 million years. Rich with iron, the water oxidizes when it contacts oxygen at the surface, turning rust red. But the story didn't end with chemistry. Within that ancient brine, researchers discovered extremophile microorganisms that survive without sunlight or oxygen, feeding on sulfur and iron. These microbes are living fossils, isolated for millions of years, adapted to conditions once thought impossible for life. Blood Falls isn't just a geological curiosity. It's a window into alien biology, a glimpse of how life might persist in the harshest environments imaginable. Every drop of red water is a message from a hidden ocean, proof that even in the deepest silence something endures. Yet the imagery is haunting. A glacier that bleeds evokes ancient myths of cursed lands and living mountains. To those stationed nearby in the dry valleys, the sight adds an eerie quality to an already unsettling landscape. Scientists report strange experiences, tools vanishing and reappearing, whispers on the wind, the persistent feeling of being watched. Psychological stress in isolation explains much, but Blood Falls provides a vivid backdrop that amplifies every shadow and sound. For those inclined toward mystery, it becomes something more, a marker, perhaps even a warning of what lies deeper below. On December 1st, 1959, 12 nations signed a document that would shape Antarctica's future for decades to come. The Antarctic Treaty declared the continent a zone of peace, reserved for scientific research, free from military activity and territorial claims. On its face, this was a remarkable achievement. At the height of the Cold War, when the United States and Soviet Union competed for dominance across every frontier, they agreed to set aside their rivalry for this one frozen land. But the timing raises questions. Why would superpowers locked in global tension suddenly unite to protect a remote wilderness? Why impose strict controls on access and declare that vast regions would remain off-limits even to researchers? The treaty came just 14 years after World War II, in an era thick with rumours of Nazi bases and UFO encounters. Operation High Jump had ended mysteriously. Strange sightings were being reported worldwide, and now the most powerful nations on Earth were agreeing that Antarctica must be sealed. Some see the treaty as what it claims to be, a necessary framework to prevent conflict and protect a fragile environment. Others read it as containment, a way to control what might be discovered beneath the ice. The treaty's provisions are extensive. No new territorial claims can be made. Existing claims are frozen in place. Military activities are banned. Nuclear testing is prohibited. And crucially, access is tightly regulated. Only vetted scientists can work in the interior. Certain zones are designated as no-fly areas. Annual meetings are held behind closed doors. For conspiracy theorists, these restrictions suggest the treaty exists to guard secrets, ancient ruins, advanced technology, or evidence of visitors from beyond. For skeptics, they're simply practical measures to preserve a unique wilderness. What's undeniable is that the treaty has succeeded in keeping Antarctica mysterious. Even in an age of satellites and global connectivity, vast stretches remain unexplored. The continent's interior is still largely a blank on our maps. Whether the treaty protects only ice and wildlife, or also guards knowledge too profound to share, we may never know with certainty. But its existence reminds us that power and secrecy often walk hand in hand, and that silence can speak louder than any proclamation. Before the ice, there were forests. Geological evidence is unambiguous. Antarctica was once temperate, covered with vegetation, rivers winding through valleys that now lie buried under miles of frozen water. Fossils discovered near the Beardmore Glacier in 1912 showed leaf impressions from beech-like trees. On Alexander Island, upright fossilized tree trunks still stand, 7 meters tall, rooted in ancient soil. Pollen samples taken from seabed sediments reveal that tundra-like conditions persisted as recently as 12 million years ago. This was not a brief warm spell, but an epoch. Antarctica, as part of the supercontinent Gondwana, enjoyed a climate that supported lush ecosystems for millions of years. The transformation to ice happened gradually as the continent drifted toward the South Pole and global temperatures cooled. But the memory of its green age remains, written in stone and compressed in layers of sediment. This ancient habitability changes everything. It proves the land could have supported not just plants and animals, but potentially something more. If forests thrived, why not civilizations during fleeting windows of warmth? Mainstream archaeology insists that humanity arose long after Antarctica froze, but the fossils prove the continent has cycled through climates before. Perhaps in some forgotten interglacial period, when the ice retreated and valleys bloomed again, people did walk here. Perhaps they built, and then the ice returned, sealing their works beneath glaciers that have not relented since. Some fringe reports claim to have found evidence. In 2023, surveys near the Dufek Glacier reported formations resembling massive stone blocks arranged in patterns. Descriptions mention markings and artifacts with unfamiliar symbols. Mainstream geologists dismissed these as natural formations or misinterpretations. But in a land where entire river systems lie hidden beneath ice, where lakes the size of small countries remain unexplored, even unlikely claims carry a weight they wouldn't elsewhere. Antarctica's power is its ability to preserve. Whatever was here when the forest fell would not decay, would not erode. It would wait, frozen, until the ice retreats. And the ice is retreating. Climate change, whatever its causes, is undeniable in Antarctica. The Larsen B ice shelf collapsed in 2002, shattering in weeks. In 2023, sea ice coverage reached its lowest extent on record. Glaciers are thinning, exposing bedrock that hasn't seen daylight in millions of years. This presents a paradox. The melting is catastrophic for global sea levels, ecosystems and weather patterns, yet it also means the vault is opening. Whatever lies beneath will soon be revealed, not because we sought it, but because nature itself is breaking the seal. Satellite images already show changes, faint outlines in retreating ice, shapes that look like buried walls or foundations, metallic fragments reported near the Ross Ice Shelf in 2023, dismissed as meteoritic debris but never fully explained. Radar scans detect massive cavities beneath the Thwaites Glacier, officially described as meltwater erosion. But their scale and regularity fuel speculation about chambers, perhaps natural, perhaps not. If ruins exist beneath the ice, they will emerge within our lifetimes. If ancient technologies or artifacts are preserved there, the warming will expose them. The Antarctic Treaty can restrict human access, but it cannot stop the ice from melting. In a way, this feels inevitable. Myths from around the world speak of cycles, civilizations rising, falling, being buried by flood or ice, then revealed when the world turns again. Perhaps Antarctica's secrets are meant to surface now, at this moment in human history, when we have the tools to understand them but also the wisdom to be humbled by what we don't know. The frozen continent is speaking, not in words, but in motion. Every carving iceberg, every exposed valley, every anomaly detected by radar is a syllable in a story we're only beginning to hear. Not all of Antarctica is equally accessible, even to scientists with proper credentials. Certain regions have been designated as restricted, their coordinates omitted from tourist maps, their airspace closed to civilian aircraft. One such area is located near Lake Vostok. Official explanations cite environmental protection and the risk of contaminating pristine ecosystems, but researchers who've worked nearby describe unusual protocols, equipment inspections before departure, debriefings that feel more like interrogations, non-disclosure agreements that extend beyond standard scientific practice. In 2017, a climatologist stationed at a research base reported seeing military transport aircraft flying toward the interior, far from any established station. When he inquired about it, he was told certain operations were classified for national security reasons. National security? In Antarctica? The Wilkes-Land crater represents another enigma wrapped in restriction. Discovered through gravity measurements in 2006, this massive impact structure spans over 300 miles across, buried beneath ice in East Antarctica. Scientists believe an asteroid struck here roughly 250 million years ago, possibly contributing to the Permian extinction that wiped out most life on Earth. But some researchers have noted anomalies in the magnetic readings from the crater's centre, concentrations of metallic materials far denser than typical meteorite remains. In 2019, an Australian geophysics team requested permission to conduct ground-penetrating radar surveys of the crater's core. Their request was denied without explanation. Access to Wilkes Land is tightly controlled. Flyovers require special authorization. The few images available show only ice and snow. Whatever lies beneath that frozen impact site remains sealed, whether by policy or simply by the practical impossibility of drilling through miles of ice to reach it. These restrictions create a feedback loop. The less we can access, the more we wonder what's being protected. Perhaps it's merely ecological caution and bureaucratic inertia, or perhaps some discoveries are deemed too destabilizing to share with the wider world. In the silence between official statements and classified operations, speculation flourishes like algae in the dark waters beneath the ice. No discussion of Antarctic mysteries would be complete without addressing the accounts that refuse to disappear. Reports of unidentified aerial phenomena over the continent date back decades, documented by researchers, military personnel, and even commercial pilots. In 1965, scientists at multiple Antarctic bases reported seeing disc-shaped objects moving at impossible speeds across the polar sky. The sightings were logged, photographed, and filed away. No official investigation followed. During the 1990s, personnel at McMurdo Station and other bases began reporting luminous objects rising from the ice or descending into it. Some described them as pulsing with an inner light, moving with intelligence and purpose. Others witnessed craft emerging from the ocean near the ice shelf, leaving no wake, making no sound. In 2004, a military contractor working at a remote station claimed to have seen a metallic object disappear into a crevasse. When he reported it to his superiors, he was told to forget what he'd seen. 2 weeks later, he was rotated off the continent ahead of schedule. More recently, in 2018, satellite imagery captured over the Transantarctic Mountains showed a large dark object partially embedded in ice, with a shape unlike any known geological formation. The image circulated online briefly before being scrubbed from public databases. Official sources claimed it was a shadow artifact from image processing. These accounts are impossible to verify. Witnesses often speak anonymously, fearing ridicule or professional consequences. Physical evidence is absent or classified. Skeptics point out that extreme isolation, darkness, and psychological stress can produce vivid hallucinations. Yet the consistency of the reports is striking. objects that move unlike any human aircraft, lights beneath the ice, bases that appear on no map. The same themes recur across decades and across international boundaries, from American personnel to Russian scientists to Chilean pilots. If even a fraction of these accounts reflect something real, then Antarctica may be more than a frozen archive of Earth's past. It could be a point of contact, a threshold between our world and something beyond it. Research in Antarctica is dangerous. Blizzards strike without warning, crevasses hide beneath fresh snow. Temperatures can drop to minus 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Every year, accidents happen, and occasionally people don't come back. But some disappearances carry an unsettling quality that goes beyond environmental hazards. In 2016, a team of researchers vanished for 3 days while conducting surveys near the Transantarctic Mountains. When they finally returned to base, they were disoriented, their equipment damaged, with no memory of where they'd been. One member reported strange markings carved into an ice wall, symbols that looked deliberate but weren't in any known language. The expedition logs from those 3 days were never released. A climatologist named Rodney Marks died at the South Pole Station in 2000 under mysterious circumstances. Initially, authorities attributed his death to natural causes. An autopsy later revealed methanol poisoning. How he was exposed to a lethal dose of methanol at one of the most isolated locations on Earth was never explained. The case was quietly closed. Then there are the researchers who simply walked away. In 1997, a geologist left his tent at a field camp and never returned. Extensive searches found nothing. No body, no tracks, no equipment. It was as if he had evaporated into the white void. These incidents could be tragic accidents, nothing more. Antarctica's harshness needs no embellishment. Yet those who work there sometimes speak of something else. A presence felt but not seen. A sense that the continent itself is aware, watching, judging whether to keep its visitors or send them back. Indigenous peoples of the far south, the Maori and others, have oral traditions about a great frozen land beyond the sea. Some stories describe it as a realm of spirits, a place where the boundary between worlds grows thin. They warn that those who venture too far south may cross into territories where human presence is not welcome. Perhaps these are simply tales meant to discourage dangerous journeys. Or perhaps they preserve a wisdom older than our scientific age, that some places are meant to remain mysteries, and the cost of trespassing is higher than we imagine. Among the most provocative explanations for Antarctica's mysteries is the concept of crustal displacement, popularised by Charles Hapgood in the 1950s. The theory suggests that Earth's outer crust can shift over the molten interior, causing continents to move rapidly to new positions. If such a shift occurred in the distant past, Antarctica might not always have been at the South Pole. It could have occupied a temperate latitude supporting civilizations that thrived for millennia before catastrophic displacement buried them under ice. Hapgood pointed to geological evidence of rapid climate change, mammoth carcasses frozen mid-meal with undigested vegetation still in their stomachs, and those enigmatic ancient maps showing Antarctica's coastline. Mainstream geology largely rejected the theory. Continental drift, now understood through plate tectonics, happens gradually over millions of years, not in sudden lurches. Einstein's initial interest in Hapgood's work gave it credibility, but the scientific community moved on. Yet the theory persists in alternative history circles because it elegantly solves several puzzles. It explains how Antarctica could have been mapped when ice-free. It accounts for rapid mass extinctions, and it suggests that advanced civilizations could have risen and fallen, their remains now locked beneath miles of ice, beyond our reach. If crustal displacement did occur, the implications are staggering. It means cataclysms can reshape the world far faster than we believe. It means human history might be punctuated by apocalypses that erased entire epochs. And it means Antarctica is not a wasteland that was always frozen, but a tomb that once was Eden. Whether the theory holds scientific merit or not, it captures something essential about our relationship with the frozen continent. The intuition that beneath the ice lies a story too important to ignore. As we near the end of this journey, let's acknowledge the space between fact and speculation. Much of what I've shared tonight exists in that liminal zone. Hard evidence is scarce. Official explanations are often frustratingly vague. The gap between what we know and what we wonder grows wider with every restricted zone and classified document. Some of what we've explored has scientific backing. The ancient maps, the the subglacial lakes, the fossilized forests. These are real, documented, uncontroversial. Other elements, the pyramid, Operation High Jump's true purpose, the UFO sightings, fall into murkier territory. They're supported by eyewitness accounts, declassified hints, and circumstantial patterns, but they lack the definitive proof that would satisfy skeptics. And then there are the ideas that exist purely in the realm of speculation. Nazi bases, entrances to Hollow Earth, alien outposts. These capture our imagination not because evidence compels belief, but because Antarctica itself feels like a place where impossible things might be true. What matters is not whether every mystery has a dramatic explanation, but that we remain open to questions. Our ancestors built civilizations, developed technologies, achieved understandings that we're only now rediscovering. To assume we know the full scope of human history is arrogance. Antarctica stands as a monument to our ignorance. It reminds us that for all our satellites and sensors, vast territories of Earth remain unexplored. It whispers that the past might be stranger than we've been taught, that the story of our species might have chapters we've lost. Belief is a choice. You can accept the orthodox narrative. Antarctica is simply frozen wilderness. Its mysteries nothing more than geology and psychology. Or you can hold space for the possibility that beneath the ice lies evidence that would rewrite everything we think we know. Either way, the continent keeps its secrets. For now. As you drift towards sleep tonight, consider this final thought. Antarctica is changing. The ice that has guarded its secrets for millions of years is melting away. Within your lifetime, landscapes that haven't been seen since before humanity existed will be exposed to daylight. If there is nothing hidden beneath the ice, we'll simply gain new understanding of Earth's geological past. Fascinating, perhaps, but not world-changing. But if the ice has been hiding something, ruins of a forgotten civilization, technology beyond our current understanding, evidence that we are not the first intelligent species to arise on this planet, then everything changes. The revelation wouldn't come as a sudden announcement, but gradually in drips and leaks. A satellite image showing geometric patterns. A research team's unexplained discovery. A declassified document from a decades-old expedition. And perhaps that's already happening. Perhaps the slow disclosure has begun, hidden in scientific journals and obscure reports, waiting for someone to connect the pieces. Antarctica is patient. It has waited through ice ages and epochs, through the rise and fall of countless species. But now, as the ice retreats and humans venture deeper into the interior with better technology, the waiting may be coming to an end. The frozen continent is waking up, and when it fully opens its eyes, when the last veils of ice melt away, we may find ourselves face to face with a truth we've been circling around for centuries. A truth about who we are, where we came from, and what came before. For now, the ice still holds. The mysteries remain sealed, and we can only watch and wonder and wait for the continent at the end of the world to reveal what it's been protecting all along. Rest well and let your dreams take you to that frozen frontier, to mountains that might be pyramids, to waters that flow in darkness, to a landscape that remembers everything and forgets nothing. Antarctica waits, and perhaps soon it will speak. Before we venture further into Antarctica's deepest mysteries, we must pause and consider what happens to information that challenges the accepted narrative of human history. Throughout the 20th century, discoveries have emerged that don't fit neatly into the timeline we've constructed. Artifacts that appear in the wrong geological layers. Technologies that shouldn't exist given our understanding of ancient capabilities. Structures that suggest knowledge we believe came much later. These anomalies don't vanish. They're catalogued, filed, and often forgotten in the basements of museums and universities around the world. Archaeologists call them out-of-place artifacts. Historians treat them as curiosities or mistakes. But what if they're neither? Antarctica represents the ultimate shadow archive. Unlike a museum basement, its storage medium is ice miles thick. Unlike bureaucratic filing systems, its catalogue is written in the language of geology, radar, and seismic surveys. And unlike human institutions that can choose what to reveal, the continent operates on its own timeline, slowly, inexorably opening its vaults as the climate shifts. Consider how quickly our understanding of ancient history has evolved in just the past century. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, discovered in the 1980s, pushed back the date of monumental architecture by 6,000 years. The Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek astronomical calculator of stunning complexity, proved that sophisticated mechanical engineering existed 2 millennia ago. Each discovery forced us to revise what we thought impossible for ancient peoples. If such revelations can emerge from well-explored regions of the world, imagine what might surface from a continent we've barely begun to investigate. Antarctica is approximately 5.5 million square miles of territory. Only about 0.4% has been physically explored on the ground. The rest remains known only through remote sensing, aerial photography, and educated speculation. In that vast, untouched expanse, statistical probability suggests there must be features of significance we haven't yet identified. The question isn't whether Antarctica holds surprises, but what kind of surprises, and whether we're prepared for answers that might disrupt our comfortable certainties about human origins. To understand why Antarctica captures conspiracy theorists' imagination so completely, we must examine one of the most persistent legends, the Nazi presence in Antarctica during World War II. In 1938 and 1939, Nazi Germany launched an expedition to Antarctica called the Neuschwabenland Expedition, named after the research vessel that carried the team. Their official mission was to scout whaling stations and explore unclaimed territory. The expedition mapped extensive areas of Queen Maud Land, dropping thousands of metal markers engraved with swastikas to assert territorial claims. The facts end there. What follows is a mixture of documented history, unverified claims, and pure speculation that has grown increasingly elaborate over the decades. According to various theories, the Nazis discovered ice-free areas warmed by geothermal vents during their expeditions. Some accounts describe vast caverns beneath the ice, accessed through hidden entrances. These spaces, the stories suggest, were developed into a secret base, called Base 211 or New Swabia, where advanced research continued even after Berlin fell in 1945. The most extreme versions of this narrative claim that Nazi scientists used Antarctica as a testing ground for revolutionary aircraft designs based on unconventional physics. The bell-shaped craft reported in UFO sightings, according to this theory, were actually German inventions powered by exotic propulsion systems. When the war ended, key personnel and prototypes were evacuated to the Antarctic base, where development continued. This would explain, proponents argue, why the United States mounted Operation High Jump with such overwhelming force just months after the war's end. They weren't conducting scientific research. They were attempting to locate and eliminate the last Nazi stronghold. Evidence for these claims is thin and contested. Photographs allegedly showing entrances to underground bases turn out to be natural ice caves, or shadows misinterpreted. Documents purporting to be Nazi communications about Antarctica have been exposed as forgeries or mistranslations. Eyewitness accounts are invariably second-hand or third-hand, impossible to verify. Yet the legend persists because it contains a grain of historical truth. Germany did send expeditions to Antarctica. They did claim territory, and they were developing advanced weapons technology in the final years of the war, including the first jet aircraft and early work on rockets that would later become the foundation of both American and Soviet space programs. The leap from documented facts to secret bases requires assuming a level of coordination and secrecy that strains credibility. Building an installation capable of supporting hundreds of people in Antarctica would require massive logistical support, supply ships, construction equipment, fuel, food, and communication systems. All of this would need to happen without detection by Allied intelligence, which by 1944 had broken German codes and monitored their naval movements extensively. Still, the story resonates because it taps into a deeper anxiety about hidden knowledge and secret power. If a defeated regime could establish a foothold in the most remote place on Earth, what else might be hidden from public view? What other secrets might powerful institutions be keeping? The Nazi Antarctic base may be fiction, but it serves a purpose in the modern mythology of Antarctica. It establishes that the continent isn't just geologically interesting, but geopolitically significant. It transforms Antarctica from a frozen wasteland into contested ground, a place where secrets are worth fighting for. National governments maintain a curious relationship with Antarctica. On the surface, their involvement appears purely scientific and environmental. Research stations dot the coast, studying everything from climate patterns to penguin populations. International cooperation is emphasised. The Antarctic Treaty is celebrated as a triumph of diplomacy. But beneath this facade of transparency, layers of classification create a shadow landscape of restricted information. The United States Antarctic Program, for instance, operates under the National Science Foundation, a civilian agency. Yet military logistics support provided by the Department of Defense means that significant aspects of Antarctic operations fall under military jurisdiction. Certain research projects are classified for national security reasons, though what constitutes a security threat on an uninhabited continent is never clearly explained. Russia maintains a similar dual structure. Civilian scientists conduct research at bases like Vostok Station, but military transport and logistics divisions control access. When Russian teams drilled into Lake Vostok in 2012, international observers noted unusual security protocols. Key findings were delayed for months before publication, and some data was never released at all. China has expanded its Antarctic presence dramatically in recent decades, establishing multiple bases and conducting extensive inland surveys. While officially focused on climate research, some Western intelligence analysts suggest dual-use capabilities, technologies and infrastructure that could serve military purposes if needed. China's research includes high-resolution mapping of the continent's interior, satellite communication installations, and deep ice core drilling in areas previously unexplored. What are all these nations really doing in Antarctica? The official answer is science, and much of it genuinely is climate data collection, ice core analysis, astronomical observation from the clear polar skies, and biological research in extreme environments. But the classified portions, the restricted zones, the unexplained security measures, these suggest additional agendas. Perhaps they're looking for resources, mineral deposits locked beneath the ice, freshwater reserves that will become invaluable as climate change accelerates, or strategic positions for future territorial claims if the treaty regime ever collapses. Or perhaps they're searching for something else, something suggested by the persistent rumours, the anomalous readings, the occasional unexplained discovery that gets mentioned in technical journals and then quietly forgotten. The silence isn't absolute. Occasionally cracks appear. A researcher mentioned something unusual in an interview before being reminded of confidentiality agreements. A declassified document reveals that certain surveys were conducted decades ago but never published. Satellite imagery shows activities in areas supposedly closed to research. These glimpses are never enough to confirm the extraordinary claims, but they're sufficient to keep questions alive. And in the absence of transparency, speculation fills the void like water flowing into cracks in ice, freezing solid, expanding, creating new fractures. One of the most intriguing aspects of Antarctic research in recent years involves thermal imaging and ground-penetrating radar surveys. These technologies allow scientists to study what lies beneath the ice without drilling, revealing a hidden landscape of mountains, valleys, and lakes. They've also revealed something unexpected: heat signatures that don't align with known volcanic or geothermal activity. In 2018, a NASA study identified a massive heat source beneath Piri Reis land in West Antarctica. The warmth, equivalent to the output of Yellowstone's supervolcano, creates meltwater cavities beneath the ice sheet. Scientists attributed it to a mantle plume, a column of hot rock rising from deep within Earth's interior. But other thermal anomalies are harder to explain. In 2020, European Space Agency satellites detected heat signatures near the Princess Elizabeth Mountains. The patterns were irregular, concentrated in specific areas, rather than distributed as you'd expect from natural geothermal activity. When ground teams attempted to investigate, they reported equipment malfunctions and were forced to turn back due to sudden weather changes. A similar anomaly was identified near the Gamburtsev Mountains, a massive range buried beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet. Seismic surveys had already revealed these mountains as mysterious. Despite being covered by ice for millions of years, they show sharp, jagged peaks that should have eroded long ago. The discovery of heat concentrations in specific valleys of this range added another layer of strangeness. Officially, these thermal signatures are attributed to volcanic activity, geothermal vents, or subglacial water flow. But some researchers privately question whether these explanations are sufficient. The patterns are too localized, too concentrated, and in some cases, electromagnetic readings accompany the heat, suggesting something more than simple geology. Could these be natural phenomena we don't yet understand? Absolutely. Earth's interior is still largely mysterious to us. We've barely scratched the surface in terms of understanding the complex dynamics of heat transfer, magma movement, and geothermal systems beneath ice sheets. But consider another possibility. What if some of these heat sources are artificial? Not in the sense of human-made installations necessarily, but perhaps remnants of ancient technologies that continue to function deep beneath the ice. Machines from a forgotten civilization, still drawing power from geothermal sources, their original purposes lost but their operation continuing in the darkness. It sounds like science fiction. Yet every technology we now take for granted, nuclear reactors, satellites, computers, would seem like magic to people from even a few centuries ago. If a civilization advanced enough to map Antarctica's coastline before it froze existed, what level of technology might they have achieved? The thermal anomalies may be nothing more than volcanic hotspots, or they may be beacons, markers left by those who came before waiting to be, discovered by those who finally developed the means to detect them. Throughout the world, ancient peoples constructed monuments using massive stone blocks, fitted together with precision that challenges our understanding of their capabilities. From the pyramids of Egypt to the walls of Cusco in Peru, from Stonehenge to the Moai of Easter Island, megalithic construction appears across cultures that supposedly had no contact with each other. These structures share certain characteristics. Massive stones, often weighing dozens or even hundreds of tons, transported from distant quarries and fitted together so precisely that a knife blade cannot fit between them. The construction techniques remain debated. Modern engineers struggle to imagine how ancient peoples, lacking cranes and power tools, accomplished these feats. Various explanations have been proposed: vast labour forces, ingenious lever systems, rolling logs, and tremendous patience. These methods could work, in theory, but they require assuming ancient peoples dedicated extraordinary resources to projects whose purposes we can only guess at. Temples, tombs, astronomical calendars, or perhaps something else entirely. A minority of researchers propose a different explanation. These megalithic sites represent the remnants of a global civilization that existed before recorded history. This culture, they argue, possessed advanced knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and engineering. They built monuments on a scale that reflected their technological sophistication. This civilization would have thrived during the last ice age, when sea levels were nearly 400 feet lower than today, and vast coastal regions now underwater were dry land. When the Ice Age ended roughly 12,000 years ago, rapidly rising seas drowned these coastal civilizations. Only their mountain monuments survived, later encountered by the ancestors of modern peoples who attributed them to gods or giants. If such a civilization existed, Antarctica would have been part of their world. Perhaps not as the frozen continent we know, but during a warm period, or along ice-free coastal regions. The maps that show Antarctica's coastline might be their legacy, copied and recopied by later cultures who no longer understood their origins. The megalithic sites scattered across the globe could then be seen as nodes in a network, remnants of a civilization whose reach was truly worldwide. And if they built in Egypt, Peru, and Easter Island, why not Antarctica? The pyramid-shaped mountain we discussed earlier takes on new significance in this context. Rather than being an isolated anomaly, it could be one more point in that ancient network. The technology to build such monuments at locations across the globe implies the capability to build anywhere, including in regions that would later be buried by ice. Mainstream archaeology rejects this hypothesis, noting that the megalithic sites span thousands of years and represent distinct cultures with different purposes. The similarities, they argue, result from parallel development, humans independently discovering that large stones provide stability and permanence, that certain proportions have aesthetic and structural appeal. But the alternative view persists because the conventional explanations often feel incomplete. How did ancient peoples transport stones weighing 200 tons over mountainous terrain? Why do certain sites align with astronomical phenomena with remarkable precision? Why do myths from around the world describe a golden age when giants built the great structures, followed by catastrophic floods? Antarctica fits into this puzzle as both evidence and mystery. If it contains monuments, they would validate the alternative history. If it remains silent, revealing only ice and stone, the debate continues. But the possibility alone transforms how we look at those enigmatic pyramids scattered across the ancient world. While much attention focuses on potential ruins and hidden bases, perhaps the most profound mysteries of Antarctica are biological. Life in its most extreme forms exists here, challenging every assumption we hold about the requirements for survival. We've discussed the microbes in subglacial lakes, surviving without sunlight or oxygen for millions of years, but they're just the beginning. Bloodfalls offers a glimpse into an entire shadow biosphere, organisms so different from surface life that they might as well be alien. In 2013, scientists drilling into the Ross Ice Shelf discovered amphipods and other small creatures living in complete darkness beneath 2,400 feet of ice. Their presence raised immediate questions. What were they eating? How did they get there? The closest open ocean was 12 miles away, yet here were animals thriving in conditions thought impossible for complex life. Further research revealed vast microbial ecosystem beneath the ice, feeding on hydrogen and sulfur compounds rather than sunlight-dependent photosynthesis. These organisms represent alternative biochemistry, different pathways to survival that evolution discovered in isolation. But there are stranger reports, unverified and officially dismissed, that hint at discoveries even more remarkable. In 2019, members of a Russian research team allegedly reported finding preserved specimens in ice cores that resembled no known organism. Descriptions mentioned segmented bodies, unusual appendages, and cellular structures that didn't match any kingdom of life. The samples were immediately classified, shipped to Moscow, and never discussed publicly again. When asked about them later, officials claimed the reports had been misunderstandings, mistaken identifications of known species. Similar whispers emerge periodically from other nations' research programs. A Chilean biologist supposedly found eggs in a cave beneath the ice, fossilized but showing geometric patterns that suggested artificial engineering. A Japanese team reported skeletal remains that resembled reptilian forms but with proportions all wrong, too large, too elongated. None of these accounts come with photographic evidence or published papers. They exist as rumours, stories told by researchers who worked with someone who claimed to have seen something extraordinary. Folklore of the modern scientific community. Yet they align with a broader question that legitimate biologists increasingly ask. Could Antarctica harbour endemic species we haven't discovered? Large animals, even, adapted to subglacial environments. The continent's ice sheet contains caverns, some as large as cathedrals, formed by geothermal heating. These spaces have stable temperatures, liquid water, and potentially access to the ocean. In principle, they could support ecosystems completely isolated from the surface, evolved separately for millions of years. What would such organisms look like? They'd likely be pale, possibly eyeless, adapted to pressure and darkness. But beyond that, evolution in isolation produces surprising forms. Cave-dwelling species on the surface often look bizarre compared to their surface relatives. What mutations might have accumulated in Antarctica's hidden caverns over millions of years? The discovery of such creatures would be scientifically revolutionary, but not necessarily paradigm-shattering. They'd be Earth life, however strange. But what if some of the unverified reports reflect something else? Not terrestrial evolution, but preservation. What if organisms from Antarctica's warmer past were flash frozen and remain intact in the ice? Not fossils, but actual tissue, cells, potentially even viable DNA. We know from Siberia that animals can be preserved remarkably well in permafrost. Mammoth carcasses have been found with soft tissue still present after 12,000 years. Cells have been extracted that, under laboratory conditions, showed signs of biological activity. If Antarctica underwent rapid climate change in the past, entire ecosystems could have been frozen in place. The ice that destroyed them also preserved them perfectly. Drilling into the wrong ice core might release genetic material from species that have been extinct for millions of years, or perhaps from animals that lived during a brief warm period, remnants of a fauna we never knew existed. There's also the uncomfortable possibility that some biological discoveries in Antarctica are being kept secret, precisely because they're too significant to release. A new microbe is interesting but manageable. But finding preserved specimens of hominids in ice layers that predate accepted human evolution, that would rewrite textbooks and challenge religious doctrines. It would be the kind of discovery institutions might choose to suppress, at least until they understood its full implications. Antarctica's biological secrets may ultimately prove more revolutionary than any ancient ruins. Life itself, in forms that challenge our classifications and expand our understanding of what's possible, waiting in the ice for the right moment to return to light. Those who spend extended time in Antarctica's interior often describe a phenomenon that's difficult to convey to those who haven't experienced it: the profound silence. In most environments, even ones we consider quiet, there's always ambient sound. Wind through trees, distant traffic, birds, insects, the hum of electrical systems. Our brains filter these sounds unconsciously, creating a baseline we don't notice until it's absent. In Antarctica's interior, that baseline vanishes. The ice absorbs sound. The air is so cold and dry that it barely carries acoustic waves. There is no wind, no life, no human machinery beyond your immediate vicinity. The silence becomes almost physical, a presence rather than an absence. Researchers report psychological effects from this silence. Some find it meditative, restful, a rare opportunity to hear themselves think without distraction. Others find it oppressive, even frightening. The human brain, deprived of sensory input, begins generating its own. Phantom sounds, whispers, music that isn't there. This phenomenon, known as auditory hallucination, is well documented in extreme isolation. Explorers, castaways and prisoners in solitary confinement report similar experiences. The brain, evolved for a world full of sound, doesn't handle complete silence well. But some who work in Antarctica describe something more specific than random neural noise. They report patterns in what they hear, rhythms that repeat, whispers that almost form words, and occasionally sounds that seem to come from beneath the ice. In 2012, seismologists working near the West Antarctic ice sheet set up monitoring equipment to track ice movement. Their instruments, designed to detect low-frequency vibrations, recorded something unexpected: rhythmic pulses occurring at regular intervals roughly every 17 hours. The source appeared to be deep beneath the ice sheet, possibly miles down. The frequency was too low for human hearing, but could be converted into audible sound for analysis. When played back, the pulses sounded almost musical, a deep thrumming that rose and fell in patterns that suggested structure rather than randomness. The team proposed various explanations: tidal flexing of the ice sheet, geothermal vents releasing pressure, or meltwater flowing through subglacial channels. None perfectly fit the data. The pulses were too regular, too consistent. Similar acoustic anomalies have been detected elsewhere in Antarctica. In 2016, hydrophones placed beneath the Ross ice shelf recorded what researchers called biological sounds, calls and clicks that resembled whale songs but didn't match any known species. The sounds came from the deep water beneath the ice shelf where light never penetrates. Were these unknown whale species? Possibly, but whales need to surface to breathe. How would they navigate in complete darkness, beneath hundreds of feet of ice to find breathing holes? And why would they choose such a hostile environment when open ocean is available? The sounds could be geological, ice settling and cracking in ways that produce acoustic artifacts. Or they could be something we haven't considered: resonances from ancient structures, vibrations from geothermal systems, or even electromagnetic phenomena converting to sound through interactions with ice and water. The silence of Antarctica, it turns out, isn't silence at all. It's a different soundscape, one that requires instruments to fully perceive, and what those instruments detect sometimes defies easy categorization. For those stationed at remote research facilities, these sounds, whether hallucinated or real, contribute to the sense that Antarctica is not quite lifeless. Something hums in the depths. Something moves through the darkness beneath the ice. And whether it's geological, biological, or something else entirely, it reminds us that we're visitors in a realm that operates by rules we don't fully understand. History remembers the famous Antarctic explorers: Shackleton, Scott, Amundsen, Byrd. Their expeditions are well documented, their discoveries recorded, their hardships celebrated. But they weren't the only ones who ventured into the frozen south. Numerous expeditions, particularly in the 19th and early 20th centuries, left minimal records. Some were private ventures, funded by wealthy individuals seeking glory or scientific knowledge. Others were commercial missions hunting seals or whales. A few were military operations, mapping coastlines for strategic purposes. Many of these expeditions ended badly. Ships crushed by ice, crews that never returned, graves marked only by cairns of stone, if marked at all. Antarctica has swallowed countless lives, their stories lost to history. But occasionally fragments surface. A journal found in a museum archive, a letter mentioning observations that were never officially reported, a ship's log describing an encounter that the captain chose not to include in his formal report. In 1937, a Norwegian whaling ship reported finding wreckage on the Antarctic coast that appeared to be from an expedition no one could identify. The wood was ancient, the metal fittings corroded beyond recognition. The crew collected a few artifacts but left most of the wreckage in place. The artifacts were logged at a museum in Oslo and then lost during World War II. A British expedition in 1902, led by a captain named Edward Harwick, ventured deep into the Antarctic interior despite having neither the experience nor equipment for such a journey. Only one member of the 5-person team returned to the coast, suffering from severe frostbite and apparent mental breakdown. He claimed they had discovered a valley free of ice, heated by volcanic vents, where they found evidence of previous habitation, stone foundations, carved markers and artifacts of unknown origin. The survivor died within days of being rescued. His account was dismissed as delirium. The expedition's sponsors, embarrassed by the disaster, suppressed most records. Only a brief mention appears in a newspaper from that era, noting the tragic loss of 4 men to the frozen continent. Were these stories true, or were they fabrications, delirium from oxygen deprivation and cold? We'll never know. The sites described were never relocated. No follow-up expeditions were launched. The accounts became footnotes in exploration history, curiosities mentioned in dusty archives. But they add to Antarctica's mystique. If even a fraction of these forgotten expeditions actually found something anomalous, something that challenged understanding or couldn't be explained, those discoveries vanished with the explorers who made them. Consider how much knowledge can be lost in a single generation. An explorer sees something extraordinary, but dies before reporting it fully. The fragments that survive are dismissed as mistakes or lies. Within decades, the event is forgotten entirely. Antarctica's vastness and harshness ensure that verification is nearly impossible. A valley spotted from one angle might never be found again. A cave entrance might be buried by the next blizzard. The frozen continent keeps its secrets not through conspiracy, but through simple inaccessibility. And among all the lost expeditions, all the explorers who never returned, how many saw things we would give anything to know about today? Few phenomena match the beauty of Aurora Australis, the southern lights that dance across Antarctic skies. Streams of charged particles from the sun interact with Earth's magnetic field, creating luminous curtains of green, red and violet that shimmer and pulse across the darkness. For researchers stationed in Antarctica during the winter months, the aurora is one of the few sources of beauty in an otherwise harsh existence. They photograph it, study it, marvel at how it transforms the blank white landscape into something magical. But occasionally, observers report auroral displays that behave strangely, colours that don't match the usual palette, patterns that seem too structured, too geometric, and most peculiarly, auroras that appear when solar activity is low, when the scientific models predict no significant displays should occur. In 2015, researchers at Concordia Station documented an aurora that lasted for 13 consecutive nights, despite minimal solar wind activity. The display included unusual orange and blue hues rarely seen in southern lights. More strangely, the aurora seemed to concentrate over a specific region inland, returning to the same location each night, rather than spreading across the sky as typically happens. Attempts to correlate the display with known atmospheric or magnetic phenomena were unsuccessful. The aurora simply appeared, night after night, then stopped as abruptly as it began. Some scientists propose that these anomalous auroras result from interactions we don't fully understand. Electromagnetic emissions from underground geology, perhaps, or atmospheric effects from Antarctica's unique environment, where the ice sheet creates its own microclimate. Others suggest that what's being observed isn't aurora at all, but some other luminous phenomenon we've been mistaking for southern lights because we have no other framework for understanding it. Indigenous peoples of the far south, particularly the Maori of New Zealand, have oral traditions about lights in the southern sky that they distinguished from ordinary aurora. These lights, they said, were spirits or warnings, messages from the realm beyond the ice. Sailors in the 19th and early 20th centuries sometimes reported similar observations, lights that behaved unlike any aurora they'd seen before, moving with apparent purpose rather than flowing with atmospheric currents. Could these be misidentifications, aurora under unusual conditions that created optical illusions? Almost certainly in most cases. But the persistent reports of structured, concentrated lights over specific Antarctic locations raise interesting questions. If something beneath the ice is generating heat or electromagnetic activity, might it affect the ionosphere in ways that produce luminous displays? The aurora remains one of nature's most spectacular shows, a reminder of Earth's connection to the sun and the dynamic forces that shape our world. But in Antarctica, where so much remains unexplained, even this well-understood phenomenon takes on an additional layer of mystery. Before we go deeper into speculation, let's ground ourselves in physical reality. The weight of Antarctica's ice is almost impossible to comprehend. The ice sheet contains approximately 6.4 million cubic miles of frozen water, weighing an estimated 6 quintillion tons. That's the number 6 followed by 18 zeros. 6 million trillion tons of ice pressing down on the continent. This weight has consequences. The Antarctic landmass is compressed, pushed downward into Earth's mantle. In some regions, the bedrock lies more than 8,000 feet below sea level, crushed down by the sheer mass above it. If the ice melted completely, the land would slowly rebound, rising thousands of feet over thousands of years as the mantle material flowed back. But for now, much of Antarctica exists in a depression created by its own ice sheet. This has implications for any hypothetical ancient civilizations. If structures were built during a warm period when ice was less extensive, they would now be buried not just by ice but potentially crushed by its weight. Stone monuments might survive, but anything less durable would be pulverized. The weight of ice also creates pressure that can melt it from below. At the base of the ice sheet, where pressure is greatest, temperatures can reach the melting point even when surface temperatures are far below freezing. This creates a lubricating layer of water that allows glaciers to flow, slowly but inexorably grinding down the landscape beneath. Any ruins beneath the ice aren't merely frozen in time, they're being actively crushed, scraped, and potentially destroyed by forces measured in quintillions of tons. What survives must be either incredibly durable or protected by unusual circumstances. Locations where ice pressure is reduced, caverns that shield from direct weight, or materials strong enough to withstand forces that would crush ordinary stone. This physical reality doesn't preclude discoveries beneath the ice, but it constrains what we might reasonably expect to find. Delicate artifacts, wooden structures, or organic materials would be long gone. Only the most durable monuments or objects made of materials we don't typically associate with ancient civilizations, metals, ceramics, or perhaps substances we haven't imagined, could survive. Understanding the weight of ice helps us distinguish between reasonable speculation and fantasy. Antarctica might hide ancient ruins, but they won't be preserved the way Pompeii was preserved by ash. They'll be whatever could withstand being entombed beneath 6 quintillion tons of moving ice for thousands or millions of years. That's a high bar for survival, but stone pyramids, massive foundations, or artifacts made of extremely durable materials might clear it. And in a world where we've discovered ancient technologies more sophisticated than we expected, astronomical computers, precision engineering, metallurgical techniques that modern science struggles to replicate, perhaps ancient peoples created materials equal to the challenge. While much attention focuses on what might lie beneath Antarctica's ice, less discussed but equally intriguing are the objects that have been seen above it. We've mentioned UFO reports, but the phenomenon of unidentified aerial activity over Antarctica extends beyond a few isolated sightings. Satellite surveillance of Antarctica is extensive. Multiple nations operate observation satellites that regularly photograph the continent. These images serve scientific purposes, tracking ice movement, measuring temperatures, identifying changes in the landscape. But satellites also capture things that weren't expected. Most are later identified: research aircraft, weather balloons, peculiar cloud formations, or artifacts of the imaging process itself. But some defy explanation. In 2018, A satellite image captured over the Antarctic peninsula showed a large dark object against the ice. Its shape was irregular but symmetrical, roughly disc-shaped, with a diameter estimated at about 90 feet. The object cast a distinct shadow, proving it had physical form and was either on or very close to the surface. By the time researchers could organise a flight to investigate, several days had passed. When they reached the location, nothing was there. The ice showed no marks, no disturbance. The object had vanished. Official analysis suggested it was a shadow artifact or a temporary ice formation that subsequently melted or blew away. But the image quality was high, and multiple experts who examined it noted that the object looked metallic, not like ice or snow. Similar sightings occur with surprising frequency. Objects that appear on satellite imagery remain for 1 or 2 passes, then disappear. Most are doubtlessly natural phenomena or imaging errors, but the sheer number of reports suggests that something is happening in Antarctic skies that we don't fully understand. The continent's isolation makes it an ideal location for testing advanced aircraft or drones. Any nation developing classified aerospace technology would benefit from a testing ground where civilian observation is minimal and international presence is limited to small research stations separated by hundreds of miles. Could some UFO reports over Antarctica simply be classified military tests? Absolutely. The United States, Russia, China, and other nations with Antarctic programs all have advanced aerospace capabilities. Flying experimental craft over the uninhabited interior would be a logical choice. But this explanation doesn't account for the historical reports dating back to the 1940s and 1950s, before drone technology existed. It doesn't explain the accounts of objects emerging from the ice or sea rather than flying overhead. Sometimes the most profound mysteries announce themselves not with dramatic discovery, but with quiet anomaly. A reading that doesn't fit, a signal where none should be. And in Antarctica, high above the frozen continent, instruments detected something that continues to baffle physicists a decade later. Between 2006 and 2016, a balloon-borne experiment called the Antarctic Impulsive Transient Antenna drifted more than 25 miles above the ice. Its mission was straightforward: detect radio pulses from neutrinos, those ghostly particles that pass through entire planets unchanged, barely interacting with matter at all. The detector found something else entirely: radio signals emerging from beneath the ice at angles around 30 degrees below the horizon. According to every model of particle physics, such signals should not exist. The pulses would have needed to travel through thousands of kilometers of rock to reach the detector, and that rock should have absorbed them completely. Dr. Stephanie Wissel, a physicist who worked on the project, described the impossibility succinctly. The radio waves came from angles far too steep. Neutrinos detected by similar experiments appear just barely below the horizon, at gentle angles. These signals pierced upward through the Earth itself. Other explanations were proposed. Perhaps they were cosmic rays reflecting off the ice in unusual ways. Perhaps atmospheric conditions created optical tricks with radio waves. Perhaps the instruments malfunctioned. Each hypothesis was tested. Each failed to match the data, some theoretical. Interpretations suggested new particles beyond the standard model of physics, exotic forms of matter that could somehow traverse solid rock. But searches by other detectors turned up nothing. The Pierre Auger Observatory in Argentina, the Ice Cube experiment at the South Pole, none detected anything similar. The signals remained classified as anomalous, their origin unknown, their nature unexplained. What does this mean for our understanding of Antarctica? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps it's simply a quirk of physics we haven't yet grasped, radio waves bouncing through ice in ways we can't model. Or perhaps something beneath that frozen continent is transmitting. Not deliberately, not as communication, but as a byproduct of processes we don't recognize. A new detector called PUIO, larger and more sensitive, is being prepared. When it flies over Antarctica, it may detect more of these impossible signals, or it may finally reveal the mundane explanation scientists hope for. But until then, the signals persist as a reminder. Even in an age of satellites and quantum computers, Antarctica can still produce data that makes no sense according to the laws we thought we understood. Technology opens windows into inaccessible places. Autonomous vehicles can dive beneath ice shells where humans cannot venture. mapping landscapes that have been sealed away for millions of years, but sometimes those vehicles don't return. In 2022, researchers from the University of Gothenburg deployed an underwater drone named RAN beneath the Dotson ice shelf in West Antarctica, where it travelled over 1,000 kilometres, recording formations with unprecedented precision. The mission succeeded brilliantly, revealing the hidden architecture of ice and rock where two worlds meet. In 2024, they returned for a follow-up mission, and RAN disappeared without a trace beneath the ice. No signal, no debris. The drone simply failed to emerge from beneath the ice shelf. Equipment failures happen, of course, especially in extreme environments where pressure, cold, and electromagnetic interference are constant challenges. Perhaps RAN became trapped in a crevasse. Perhaps its navigation systems failed and it drifted into waters too deep or too far to recover. Or perhaps it encountered something unexpected beneath the ice. The disappearance raises questions about what these vehicles are really finding. The official reports focus on geological formations, ice thickness, temperature gradients. But RAN's initial data described structures that researchers found surprising. Formations beneath the ice that showed unusual regularity. Patterns that resembled nothing they'd seen before. The details were technical, buried in academic papers most people will never read. But the language used was telling. Anomalous features, unexpectedly organised structures, further investigation required, and then the drone that could provide that further investigation vanished. Other autonomous vehicles have been lost in Antarctic waters. Most are recovered eventually, or their loss is explained by mechanical failure, battery depletion, or operator error. But a few simply disappear, leaving their missions incomplete and their final data unretrieved. What did RAN encounter in its last moments? Was it swallowed by the abyss, crushed by shifting ice, or did it stumble into waters that hid something unexpected? Without the vehicle, without its final transmissions, we're left only with questions. The research team plans to send another drone, upgraded and better equipped. Perhaps this one will succeed where RAN failed, or perhaps it too will add to the list of machines that ventured beneath Antarctica's ice and never returned. When massive icebergs carve from Antarctica's ice shelves, they create opportunities. The seafloor that emerges from beneath millennia of ice cover becomes accessible for the first time in modern history, and what researchers find there consistently surprises them. During a 2019 expedition to the Weddell Sea, scientists discovered striking geometric patterns on the newly exposed seafloor created by fish. The patterns looked architectural, thousands of circular nests arranged in precise grids, stretching across miles of ocean floor. The fish responsible were rock cod, building nests and guarding eggs in the frigid darkness. But the organisation was startling. Each nest spaced evenly from its neighbours, rows and columns extending across the seabed like streets in a planned city. More recently, when an iceberg the size of Chicago broke free in 2025, researchers exploring the exposed waters found flourishing ecosystems at depths of 1,300 metres. Large corals and sponges supported arrays of animal life, including what the team suspects are several new species. These ecosystems raise profound questions. They've been covered by ice for centuries, completely cut off from surface nutrients, yet they thrive. The mechanisms sustaining them remain mysterious. Ocean currents might deliver food from distant waters, or perhaps these communities have developed entirely closed cycles, recycling nutrients in ways we haven't yet understood. But there's another interpretation that deserves consideration. Throughout Earth's oceans, we've discovered ecosystems around hydrothermal vents, drawing energy from chemicals rather than sunlight. These communities exist independent of the surface world, powered by geological processes deep beneath the seafloor. What if similar systems exist beneath Antarctica's ice shelves, but on a larger scale? Vast networks of geothermal vents, supporting not just scattered communities, but entire ecosystems that have evolved in isolation for millions of years. The corals and sponges discovered beneath the ice shelves might be the visible edge of something far more extensive. Deeper caverns, warmed by Earth's interior, where life has followed evolutionary paths completely separate from the surface world. Some creatures might be genuinely alien in their biochemistry, adapted to conditions so extreme that they've developed metabolisms unlike anything catalogued in biology textbooks. And if such organisms exist, What else might share those hidden waters? The fish nests on the seafloor demonstrate that even in Antarctica's harsh environment, life organises, builds and persists. But the geometric precision of those arrangements, the sprawling extent of the colonies, hints at something more. Intelligence responding to conditions, perhaps even primitive culture among species we've always assumed operated purely on instinct. If rock cod can build cities on the seafloor, what might more complex organisms, evolved in the isolated darkness beneath Antarctica's ice, have achieved? Paleontology tells us that Antarctica was once unrecognisable, not the frozen desert we know today, but a green land of forests and rivers where creatures thrived in abundance. Scientists have discovered fossilised forests dating from 300 to 200 million years ago, along with evidence that tundra-like conditions persisted as recently as 12 million years ago. In 2020, researchers identified a bizarre ovoid fossil as a massive prehistoric soft-shell egg, better than 11 by 7 inches, likely laid by a marine reptile over 20 feet long. These discoveries prove that Antarctica supported complex life for immense periods, but they also raise questions about cycles we might not fully understand. Climate changes gradually over millions of years, shifting continents from lush to frozen through processes we can model. But what if changes also occur more rapidly during specific periods? What if Antarctica has cycled through habitable and uninhabitable states more frequently than geological consensus suggests? Indigenous oral traditions from the far south speak of lands beyond the ice where ancestors once lived. Maori legends describe journeys to frozen realms and return voyages that brought back strange knowledge. Polynesian navigators, who crossed thousands of miles of open ocean, may have reached Antarctic waters long before European explorers. If even brief warm periods occurred in the past 12,000 years, windows of a few centuries when coastal regions became ice-free, then human presence there would be possible. Small groups might have explored, perhaps even established temporary settlements before the cold returned. The fossils we find are primarily from deep time, millions of years past. But what about more recent biological material? Organic remains from the last few thousand years would be harder to detect, would likely have been destroyed by subsequent ice movements, and wouldn't fossilise in ways that preserve them for discovery. Yet every so often, reports surface of specimens that don't quite fit expected timelines. Bones that carbon date younger than they should. Fragments of worked wood in ice cores where no trees should exist. These findings are invariably dismissed, attributed to contamination or measurement error. But Antarctica is a continent of preservation. If anything fell into the ice under the right conditions, rapid freezing, burial beneath accumulating snow, it would remain pristine, potentially for millions of years. The mammoths of Siberia prove this, flesh and fur still intact after 12 millennia in permafrost. What else might Antarctica's ice preserve, waiting for the moment when warming exposes it to daylight once more? Beneath the ice sheet of East Antarctica lies Lake Enigma, and it lives up to its name. Unlike other subglacial lakes discovered through radar surveys, Lake Enigma showed unusual characteristics from the first scans. Radar suggested complex structures within the water, possibly microbial mats forming shapes that almost resembled architecture. The structures were described cautiously in scientific literature. Geometric configurations, organised vertical features, anomalous density variations. Each phrase carefully neutral, avoiding speculation while acknowledging that what the radar detected didn't match typical lake morphology. Attempts to drill into Lake Enigma have been proposed multiple times. Each proposal has been delayed or denied. The official reasons cite environmental concerns. Drilling into pristine subglacial lakes risks contamination, potentially destroying ecosystems that have existed in isolation for millions of years. This caution is legitimate. When Russian teams drilled into Lake Vostok, contamination from drilling fluids was a constant worry. The protocols required to maintain sterility are expensive and complex. Better to wait for technology that can sample these lakes without disturbing them. But Lake Enigma attracts particular restrictions. Flyover authorizations are difficult to obtain. Ground-penetrating radar surveys are limited, and the few research groups that have studied the lake closely find their funding applications denied more often than seems statistically normal. What makes this lake special? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps it's simply one of many sites protected by overly cautious bureaucracy. Or perhaps the initial radar surveys detected something that subsequent classified scans confirmed. Structures beneath the ice that warrant further investigation under controlled conditions, away from public observation. Lakes sealed beneath ice for millions of years represent time capsules. Whatever existed when they were cut off from the atmosphere remains preserved in those dark waters. If microbial mats truly form geometric structures in Lake Enigma, that alone would be scientifically fascinating. Evidence of biological organisation at scales we didn't think microbes could achieve? But what if those structures aren't biological? What if they're artificial, remnants of something built and then slowly buried as ice accumulated above? The radar can't distinguish between natural rock formations, biological growth, and constructed objects. It only detects density differences, shapes, and patterns. Until someone drills into Lake Enigma and retrieves actual samples, speculation is all we have. The lake keeps its secrets, sealed beneath miles of ice, accessible only through instruments that show us shadows and shapes but never clear images. One of Antarctica's most mundane mysteries involves heat. Specifically, heat that appears in places it shouldn't. In 2018, scientists identified a massive geothermal heat source beneath Piri Reis land, equivalent to Yellowstone's supervolcano. This finding explained certain melting patterns and was attributed to a mantle plume, a column of hot rock rising from Earth's interior. But other thermal anomalies resist such straightforward explanations. Ground-penetrating radar and satellite thermal imaging occasionally detect localized heat concentrations that don't correlate with known volcanic or geothermal activity. In 2020, European satellites identified heat signatures near the Princess Elizabeth Mountains. The pattern was irregular, concentrated in specific valleys, rather than distributed across a region as you'd expect from volcanic activity. Follow-up expeditions were planned, but equipment malfunctions and sudden weather deterioration forced teams to turn back. Similar anomalies have been reported near the Gamburtsev Mountains, that mysterious buried range with peaks so sharp they shouldn't have survived millions of years beneath grinding ice. Heat concentrations appear in specific valleys of this range, accompanied by electromagnetic readings that suggest something beyond simple geology. The official explanation remains geothermal activity. Earth's interior is complex, and our understanding of heat distribution beneath ice sheets is still developing. Localized venting, unusual rock compositions, or water flow patterns could all create temperature variations. But consider another possibility. If Antarctica supported civilizations during warm periods, those civilizations might have developed technologies that remain active. Not in the sense of operational machines with operators, but as dormant systems that continue functioning long after their creators disappeared. Nuclear reactions, for instance, can sustain themselves for millions of years under the right conditions. Natural nuclear reactors existed in ancient Gabon, where uranium deposits achieved critical mass and underwent fission reactions nearly 2 billion years ago. If ancient peoples understood nuclear processes, even primitively, devices they constructed could still be producing heat deep beneath the ice. Or the heat sources might be completely natural, representing geological processes we simply haven't encountered before. Antarctica is the least studied continent. Its bedrock remains largely unmapped. Unusual mineral deposits, fault line activity, or unique combinations of pressure and heat could create signatures we misinterpret. The truth likely lies in that space between conventional geology and extraordinary speculation. Antarctica probably harbours natural phenomena we haven't yet catalogued, processes that will eventually be explained through expanded research. But until that research happens, until we drill deep enough to sample what's actually producing these thermal signatures, we're left measuring heat from a distance and wondering what generates it. For decades, the ozone hole above Antarctica has been attributed to human-made chemicals interacting with polar atmospheric conditions. Chlorofluorocarbons released into the atmosphere drift to the poles, where cold temperatures and unique chemistry break down ozone molecules, creating a region of depleted protection against ultraviolet radiation. This explanation is supported by extensive data and has driven successful international efforts to phase out ozone-depleting substances. The Montreal Protocol, signed in 1987, represents one of humanity's most effective environmental interventions. But there's a detail that doesn't quite fit the standard narrative. The ozone hole appeared suddenly in the 1980s, yet CFCs had been in use since the 1930s. Why did it take 50 years for the hole to develop? And why specifically over Antarctica, when the Arctic experiences similar atmospheric conditions but shows less dramatic ozone depletion? Scientists explain this through complex atmospheric chemistry. The polar vortex isolates Antarctic air, creating conditions particularly conducive to ozone destruction. Polar stratospheric clouds provide surfaces where chemical reactions occur. The specific timing of the hole's appearance relates to the accumulation of CFCs reaching a critical threshold. These explanations are likely correct, but they leave room for questions. Could something else have contributed to the sudden appearance of the ozone hole? Could changes happening in Antarctica itself, warming, ice shelf collapse, or release of ancient gases from beneath melting ice, have interacted with atmospheric chemicals in ways we haven't fully accounted for? Some researchers have noted unusual atmospheric readings above Antarctica, electromagnetic anomalies, unexpected gas concentrations, and occasionally radio interference that doesn't correlate with known sources. These are typically attributed to natural phenomena, magnetic field interactions, or measurement artifacts. But what if the ozone hole's appearance coincided not just with CFC accumulation, but with something changing beneath Antarctica? What if volcanic activity increased during that period, releasing gases that catalyzed the reactions? Or what if something else entirely? Electromagnetic emissions, unknown chemical releases, or processes we haven't identified, contributed to the atmospheric changes. The ozone hole is recovering. CFC reductions have worked. By mid-century, scientists predict the hole will close, but its sudden appearance remains an interesting puzzle, and Antarctica's role in global atmospheric systems is more complex than we sometimes acknowledge. Imagine standing at the edge of revelation. Sensors have detected something. Data looks anomalous. Theories are whispered in laboratories. But confirmation requires more investigation, more funding, more time. And in that space between detection and confirmation, silence settles. This might describe Antarctica's current state. We stand at a threshold where technology has finally become sophisticated enough to peer beneath the ice in detail, where climate change is accelerating the exposure of long-buried landscapes, where multiple lines of evidence suggest something significant waits to be found. But the discoveries haven't happened yet. Or rather, they haven't been announced. Consider how many research teams are currently working in Antarctica. Scientists from dozens of nations conducting surveys, drilling ice cores, mapping bedrock, and analysing data. Among all that research, statistically, someone should have found something extraordinary by now. Perhaps they have, and we're in the quiet period before revelation. The period when findings are being verified, when papers are being prepared, when governments are being briefed on implications. Or perhaps the discoveries are being made continuously, but they're small things. Fragments that only make sense when assembled together. A heat signature here, an unusual radar return there, a fossil that seems slightly out of place, each piece insignificant alone, but collectively painting a picture that challenges accepted history. This is how major revelations often occur. Not through dramatic moments of discovery, but through gradual accumulation of data that eventually becomes impossible to ignore. Plate tectonics wasn't accepted immediately. Evolution faced decades of resistance. The idea that Earth was ancient rather than thousands of years old took generations to establish. If Antarctica holds evidence of ancient civilizations, forgotten catastrophes, or biological anomalies, that evidence will likely emerge slowly. A paper here suggesting unusual structures, a conference presentation proposing alternative timelines, satellite images that gain attention on social media before academic consensus forms. We might be living through that emergence now, in the early stages when pieces are scattered and only a few people recognise the pattern forming. Or we might be experiencing humanity's tendency to find patterns where none exist, to see mystery in mundane geology and meaning in random data. Either way, Antarctica keeps its silence. The ice still guards its deepest secrets, and we watch, and measure, and wonder what lies beneath. Earth's magnetic field is reasonably well mapped, its variations understood through study of iron-rich rocks and molten metal circulation in the core. But Antarctica's magnetic signature contains irregularities. The Wilkes Land crater, that massive impact structure buried beneath East Antarctic ice, shows magnetic readings that puzzle geophysicists. The concentrations of metallic materials at the crater's centre exceed what typical meteorite impacts produce. In 2019, when an Australian research team requested permission to conduct detailed ground-penetrating radar surveys of the crater's core, their application was denied without clear explanation. The crater remains one of the least studied major impact structures on Earth, despite its potential to illuminate both the Permian extinction event and the nature of asteroid compositions. Other magnetic anomalies appear scattered across Antarctica. Some correlate with known geological features, volcanic intrusions, iron-rich rock formations or fault lines. Others don't. Near the Transantarctic Mountains, surveys have detected magnetic variations that form geometric patterns, grid-like arrangements that suggest organisation rather than random distribution. These could be mineral deposits shaped by ancient tectonic forces, creating illusions of deliberate placement. Or they could be archaeological features, metal objects buried beneath ice, their magnetic signatures still detectable from above. The challenge with magnetic anomalies is interpretation. Data tells us that concentrated magnetic material exists at certain locations, but it doesn't tell us what that material is, how it got there, or when it was deposited. Without physical samples, without drilling and excavation, we're reading shadows and inferring shapes. Magnetometers can detect iron, nickel, and other magnetic materials through substantial depths of rock and ice. If ancient civilizations used metal extensively, if they built structures using iron-rich stones, or if they possessed technologies that left magnetic signatures, those traces would persist long after organic materials decayed. The grid patterns detected near the Transantarctics might be nothing more than basalt dikes, intrusions of volcanic rock that happen to cool in patterns that look organised to modern sensors. But they might also mark sites worth further investigation, places where surface expeditions could search for evidence of something unexpected beneath the ice. Access to these sites remains restricted. Environmental protections, logistical challenges, and bureaucratic inertia combine to keep most of Antarctica's interior unexplored on the ground. We have satellite data, aerial surveys, and remote sensing, but actual physical investigation of anomalies is rare, expensive, and often denied. In the age of digital storage and cloud backups, losing photographs seems nearly impossible. Yet certain images taken in Antarctica have vanished from public archives, leaving only descriptions and memories. Researchers mentioned seeing satellite images that showed unusual formations, geometric shapes in ice, dark objects on snowfields, structures that looked artificial. They share these images with colleagues, write preliminary reports, and submit papers referencing them. Then the images become unavailable. Database errors, they're told, storage corruption, classification for security reasons. The explanations vary, but the result is consistent. Images that once existed are no longer accessible. One example involves satellite footage from 2018 showing a large dark object partially embedded in ice near the Transantarctic Mountains. The shape was unusual, roughly oval with extensions that resembled artificial construction rather than natural formation. The image circulated online briefly, appearing on forums and websites dedicated to Antarctic mysteries. Within days, the image was removed from public satellite databases. Websites that hosted it received takedown notices. Official sources claimed it was a shadow artifact from image processing, a glitch that created the appearance of an object where none existed. But people who saw the original image before its removal insist it showed something physical, clear edges, distinct from surrounding ice, casting a shadow that indicated height and mass. Attempts to relocate the image through archived data or alternative satellite sources have failed. Similar disappearances have occurred with photographs taken by research personnel, images that showed unusual ice formations, unexpected biological specimens, or equipment behaving strangely. These photos typically exist on personal devices or shared drives, not public databases, yet they vanish. Hard drives corrupted, cloud accounts deleted, files mysteriously absent when researchers return to review them. Are these genuine conspiracies to suppress evidence? Or are they simply the normal data loss that happens when dealing with vast amounts of digital information in harsh environments? Antarctica's conditions destroy electronics. Cold, magnetic interference, and human error combine to lose data routinely. But the pattern is interesting. Images of routine research activities rarely disappear. Photos of ice cores, penguin colonies, and base camp operations persist. It's specifically the anomalous images, those showing something unexpected that tend to vanish. Perhaps this is confirmation bias. We remember the strange images that disappeared more vividly than the thousands of ordinary images that were successfully preserved. Our minds detect patterns and assign meaning where none exists. Or perhaps there's editorial curation happening, quiet removal of images that might cause confusion, misinterpretation, or public concern. Not malicious suppression, but protective filtering by institutions that want to avoid spreading misinformation. Either way, the gaps in photographic records create spaces for speculation. What did those images show? Why did they vanish? And what other photographs exist in classified archives, deemed too sensitive or too confusing for public release? We return, at last, to the fundamental truth about Antarctica. It's changing. The ice that has protected its secrets for millions of years is retreating, melting, exposing landscapes that were buried when humanity was young. This process is accelerating. In 2017, scientists spotted a hole in sea ice the size of Maine, the largest polynya found since the 1970s. Ice shelves are collapsing with increasing frequency. Glaciers are thinning at rates that alarm climate scientists. Within this century, vast regions of Antarctica will be ice-free for the first time in human history, whatever lies beneath, whether mundane geology or extraordinary remnants of forgotten ages, will be revealed not by our choice but by the planet's changing climate. This creates a strange paradox. The melting threatens global civilization through sea level rise and weather disruption. Yet it also promises knowledge, the opening of a frozen archive that might contain answers to questions we've asked for centuries. Some see this as inevitable revelation, the planet itself deciding that humanity is ready to confront its hidden past. Others view it as tragedy, the destruction of pristine wilderness regardless of what we might learn. But ready or not, curious or fearful, the thaw continues. Satellite imagery shows new coastlines appearing. Radar detects cavities forming beneath glaciers. Research stations are being relocated as ice shelves become unstable. And with each season, with each survey, the possibility grows that someone will find something that changes everything. A structure that shouldn't exist. A specimen that rewrites biology. A text, a tool, a sign that others were here before us. Or perhaps nothing. Perhaps Antarctica will reveal only stone and ice, ancient ecosystems and geological wonders, fascinating to science but not paradigm-shattering. Perhaps all the mysteries have mundane explanations, and the continent's only secret is that we projected our hopes and fears onto its blank white vastness. But until that revelation comes, until the ice fully retreats and we can walk across landscapes that have been hidden since before we learned to write, Antarctica remains what it has always been, the question mark at the bottom of the world waiting patiently to provide its answer.